Welcome back to the channel. I want to talk about some correspondence that's out now in the New England Journal of Medicine. This is by Peter Marks and Bob Califf. That's the Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the person who's now in charge of vaccine products, now that we've had the resignation of the good Drs. Gruber and Krauss. They have a rebuttal to Dr. Paul Offitt, who wrote an op-ed in the New England Journal of Medicine arguing that their bivalent booster policy, which they're pushing for young people, didn't make a lot of sense. He said you should reserve it for old people, for immunocompromised people. You shouldn't be pushing it on young people who've already had COVID. You got no good data for that. That was the gist of Paul Offitt's argument. And in fact, there's a lot of reasons why you're not going to get a lot of juice from that squeeze. And he didn't go on to say this, but and also the harms are non-trivial. I'm saying that as well. Well, in response to that, a rebuttal letter has been written by these two gentlemen. That rebuttal letter is worth considering line by line, and you'll be the judge of it. I think it's pretty terrible, but you be the judge of it. Okay, here we go. To the editor. Citing preliminary immunogenicity results and one study on effectiveness, Offitt argues in his perspective article that bivalent boosters against SARS-CoV-2 Omicron subvariants BA4 and 5, as well as the ancestral strain, should not be deployed throughout the entire population. That's because Paul's right, yeah. Key available evidence that was omitted by Offitt suggests otherwise. Oh, he omitted evidence. Let's hear about it, shall we? Oh, what did he omit? First sentence of the next paragraph. David Gardner and colleagues, as well as others, found that bivalent boosters had better immunogenicity against emerging variants, including BQ1.1 and XBB. That's the Kraken, isn't it? The Kraken they talk about. Then did the monovalent booster, reference too. Okay, so some people found the antibody titers were a smidge higher. The problem with this argument is that that smidge is not big enough to be clinically meaningful, and also nobody knows what it means. If you boost somebody in perpetuity, the more you boost them, the more the antibodies will go up. That's because the body is smart. It doesn't make antibodies against antigen it hasn't seen in a while all the time. And if it did make antibodies against everything you have immunity to, your blood would be like molasses. But the body knows not to make antibodies all the time. This is pretty stupid because this is a surrogate endpoint that has no validation in this setting that they're hanging their hat on. They shouldn't even say it. I think it's disgraceful to say. Next sentence. Coronavirus disease has taken tremendous toll on the entire population, resulted in more than 7,500 hospitalizations and 1,100 deaths in the United States among persons 18 to 49 between September and December 2022 alone, according to CDC. Well, those statistics are erroneous. That's number one. You have difficulty separating hospitalization with incidental COVID-19 because you're swabbing everyone relentlessly at the door from hospitalization due to COVID-19. That's one. Two, it's a statistic from the past. But you're arguing that people, the 84% of Americans who have declined your bivalent booster should go out and get it. So your argument is about the present and the future. So the statistic from the past would be irrelevant if it were true. Unfortunately, it's probably inflated and overblown. The CDC has difficulty counting numbers properly. We're going to publish that very soon. It's neither here nor there. It's an emotional argument, I think. And it doesn't even address the other issues that they're pushing the boosters down to like 5-year-olds. So what about that? Okay, let's put that aside. Several studies indicate that the bivalent boosters are clinically effective in reducing the incidences of symptomatic disease, hospitalization, and death across the age spectrum, including among persons 18 to 49 who have been vaccinated previously. Oh, really? Well, number one, the first thing I'm going to say is that it's not very important to prevent any mild symptomatic disease. That's called a cold, and you're going to get a lot of colds if you plan on living for the next few decades. Okay, that's not an important endpoint. What you do want to prevent, if you can, is hospitalization and death, and you want to do so with a favorable risk-benefit profile. I think that's what we'll agree on. The problem is that this statement is ill-supported. The three references that they cite are all from the journal MMWR. MMWR is not a good scientific journal. It's a rag that's promoted by the CDC with the worst methods I've ever seen. And it has a duty to promote information that supports the preordained policy conclusions of the CDC. It is a biased journal. It's a biased journal, okay? And they've also published some of the worst studies that not even worth the energy of your hands to tear them to shreds. You don't even want to bother. They're so bad. And I've documented that relentlessly on my website. All these studies are low quality. None of these studies are randomized, prospective randomized studies, which is really the only way to know if a therapeutic intervention actually has a benefit versus the types of people who seek out that intervention. Why did the FDA make the Pfizer original study be randomized? Why did they do that? Why didn't they just let you people who want to take the vaccine take the vaccine? Oh, well, that's because that method is not reliable. And that's what they're doing in this case. They're using an unreliable method, okay? They're saying they can extrapolate from the first study, but you can't do that in medicine. You haven't built enough of a case of corroborative evidence that those extrapolations are always sound. In fact, you have no sort of meta-regression estimates that those extrapolations will be sound. Okay, I'll put that aside. It's a bit technical. All of these retrospective studies have biases. The bias is that the 14% of Americans who rushed out to get the bivalent booster, P.S. I don't know too many of them, and I'm in the medical business, those people are very different than those who didn't rush out to get it. They may take other precautions, they may be richer, they may have certain socioeconomic factors, they may have other things that prevent them from having hospitalizations and bad outcomes. And I don't know if it was the bivalent booster or that those other advantages that conferred the difference in outcome. One study that they cite is about 65, which is not the subject of the debate. Offitt's not arguing that. This is about younger age groups. One is a criminally bad study that compares people who got bivalent boosters to people who had the primary vaccine series who may not have even gotten the first booster. But that's not a fair comparison because they're asking people who've already gotten 2 doses, a prior booster, and may or had the virus itself to get the bivalent booster. So you want to compare the people who are eligible for the bivalent booster and may get it to those who are eligible and choose not to get it. I mean, even if you were to do a retrospective observational study, the way they're doing it is backwards. They're comparing it also at times to unvaccinated. That's a pointless thing. We're not talking about should you get all of these shots versus none of these shots. We're talking about somebody who's already had several of these shots. Should they get this additional shot? That's the question. Are we on the same page here? This is Logic 101, okay? It's not even really a technical matter here. This is what the question is. Should somebody who's already gotten all these shots get one more? Okay, that's the question. Paul Offitt concedes to them in his response that, yeah, I do think that these retrospective observational studies show me that there is a transient reduction in symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 acquisition, which of course will go away with time because that's what all the other studies show. But he argues that he's not persuaded that there is a reduction in hospitalization and death. Okay, but I don't even concede the former because I don't know if the symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 reduction would have been there had they done a randomized study. These are retrospective studies that are being done by somebody who already set the policy. Let me make another point here. They are searching for post hoc justifications for their action. They didn't have this data when they made the decision. The only data they had were 8 and 11 mice that had antibody titer data. They didn't have good data when they made the decision. Their decision was made on that data. Now they've made the decision, they've publicly announced their decision, they're wedded to their decision, and they need to generate observational data that supports their decision, which they're going to publish in their journal. That's not exactly a recipe for impartial science. Are we living on the same planet? Obviously, that would be a farce. They have a huge political and personal and scientific reputation interest in getting a particular result. And observational data are very malleable. And of course, they achieve the result. But even then, they don't achieve it very robustly because it's very hard, even when you data dredge to show an all-cause mortality or a hospitalization reduction in this age group. It's very, very hard, even with all their prestidigitation. It's very hard. All right. Paul Offitt says, quote, in his response, the protection against hospitalization that was afforded by bivalent boosters, which was the goal of this vaccine, was limited in the studies that you just cited to me, Peter Marks and Bob Califf, to people over the age of 65 and those with a median age of 76. Okay, so it doesn't apply to this age group, okay? That's Offitt's rebuttal. I think that's pretty strong. Next, Marks and Califf. They keep digging. You can watch them dig their little hole here, okay? Given the excellent safety profile of the vaccines, which is similar to that of influenza vaccine among persons 6 months of age and older, the totality of the available evidence supports the vaccination of all currently eligible persons with updated COVID-19 vaccines as an important public health intervention. Okay, number one, you're using the auspices of an EUA, the emergency use authorization. I look around and I don't see much of an emergency in 20-year-old men. who have already had 3 doses and already had COVID. I don't see an emergency there, and I think it's dishonest to say there is, and I don't think anyone can genuinely say that it warrants special regulatory pathways. You're abusing an authority that was granted in a kind of emergency that you yourself control when the emergency ends, okay? Very, very problematic stuff. And actually, if somebody wanted to be president and make a lot of money, you can just abuse these authorities and get your company to, get a product approved very quickly under the auspices of EUA. I'm sure somebody will do that in the near future. I mean, why not abuse these things? Are already being abused. Just abuse them a little bit more. That's one. Two, they say this, given the excellent safety profile of the vaccines, which is similar to the influenza vaccine. Is the COVID-19 vaccine's side effect profile similar to the influenza vaccine? Let me think about that. Do medical residents always call in on Jeopardy every year after the influenza vaccine? Do people spend 2 days in bed after the influenza vaccine? Do some people have 103-degree fevers after the influenza vaccine to the rate with which they're having it here? Do men between the ages of 16 and 24 have a 1 in 3,200 risk of myocarditis on dose 2 from the Moderna product from the influenza vaccine? Do they have a 1 in 10,000 risk of myocarditis from the booster shot with the influenza annual booster? No, they don't. You have to be bullshitting me. Nobody believes this. Walid Jalad from the University of Pittsburgh has a nice tweet where he says, does anyone believe this? And if you're going to go out there, he adds, if you're going to go out there and you're going to say, we need to police misinformation, why are you lying? Why are you lying like this? And why is the New England Journal allowing somebody to claim that the side effect profile of COVID-19 vaccines is the same as influenza? Right now, 80% of America has been vaccinated. I don't know a single person who actually in good faith says the side effect profile is exactly the same as the annual flu shot. It is definitely more reactogenic. It's definitely more immunogenic. If you're older and extremely vulnerable from COVID, that risk of reactogenicity is nothing. I mean, you should take the risk because there could be there was a net benefit certainly in the first quarter of 2021, and that was a wise choice. But if you're a 20-year-old in 2023 and you've gotten multiple doses and you had COVID, and they're coming along and saying, well, it's just like a flu shot in terms of side effects, that's clearly bullshit. I mean, how can they say that? It's just a frank lie. I don't know why they even published that. It's problematic. I mean, they are lying, and they're lying. They're holding two roles, okay? They want to be the regulator, and the job of the regulator is to not be a political appointee and not call, and to call balls and strikes. The regulator has to be impartial. The regulator can't, be a partisan. The regulator has to be somebody who's like, my job is to look at science and say, do the potential upside and known upside outweigh the potential downside and known downside. That's a regulator. But they also are working hand in hand with the White House, which is a political body. And the political body has already made political choices. They've decided that it's politically right to offer the bivalent boosters. It's politically necessary to make sure they're available to very young kids. Is it medically necessary or scientifically necessary? I don't think many people would agree with them, and certainly not if people have had COVID-19. They're confusing science for politics, and that's why they're derelict. They're doing a derelict job. They're destroying the reputation. When you write in the New England Journal of Medicine, the side effect profile is the same, you're destroying the reputation of the agency because you're lying to people, and they know you're lying. I mean, I think everybody will know that that is a lie. You don't even have to say much. Everybody knows you're lying when you say there's good evidence a 2-year-old should mask, and then you look and you see they're chewing on the math. They know there could not possibly be good evidence. And then they see them napping and they all take it off. I mean, what are you to think? If you treat American citizens as if they're idiots, then you ask, wow, how come you don't trust me? Well, you treated me like an idiot and you kept lying to me, okay? I mean, it's simple. That's why. And then, well, what about, I think it was Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan did it. Oh, yeah, of course. Joe Rogan did it. No, you did it, Bob Califf. You did it, Peter Marks. You lost the trust because you are habitually wrong. You didn't use your powers for good. Your power was make Pfizer do a randomized trial of human beings and measure severe disease and have an interaction coefficient that can look by age and look by comorbidities and actually see that it works in whom it works and see in whom it may not work. That's your power. That's the power of the government to compel the company to generate relevant data. You abandon that power. I don't know why you would abandon the power. It really only benefits the company and maybe your political overlords who may be wanting to benefit the company. But I'll be very curious where you go to work in the next few years. Okay, closing. Bob Califf likes to say misinformation is the leading cause of death. And that's just a great thing for him to say because that statement is pulled directly out of his ass. I mean, he really has no data that is true. He's making up information to make a point about podcasters and other things that he may dislike, which is based on nothing, which is ironically a form of misinformation. So he's actually committing misinformation when he tells you that misinformation is the leading cause of death. If I were a reporter, I'm not a reporter, but if I were a reporter, I might ask somebody, hey, you keep saying this. What's the reference for this bizarre claim? And when they say there's no data that supports it, I pulled it out of my ass, you might write a news story that the FDA commissioner is committing a great irony. But of course, reporters only are critical when the opposing political party is in power. See, I'm actually on the left, but I know that that's pretty stupid. You have to hold power to power to account, no matter who's in power. This is really ridiculous. The same is true here. This whole letter by Bob Califf and Peter Marks is FDA propaganda. They cite antibody titer levels, which is the surrogate endpoint that doesn't correlate with how people feel or function. It's actually useless. Put them in the trash. One study showed this, one study showed that. Paul Offitt's point was the delta, the change in antibody titer, is unlikely to afford a meaningful reduction in severe disease because it's smaller than the change between the two products, of which you've already conceded that there's unlikely to be very much difference in severe disease. So how can you now say that the difference is important? You've already conceded it's not important. You know, he's got them in this sort of catch-22. But put that all aside. This is all a surrogate endpoint. It should all be put in the trash can. You don't get to continually deploy medical products in hundreds of millions of people based on shitty surrogate endpoint science that you have not validated. And to validate it, you can read my book on my book Malignant, 2 chapters on that, on how to validate surrogates. They're not even close. Second point, they cite a retrospective observational study that is confounded, has residual confounding, has a number of other problems in it, often including the fact that one of the studies doesn't even pertain to the target age group that Offitt is arguing about. It's only 65. Then they cite reductions in symptomatic disease, which is silly because we're all going to get COVID if we haven't had it already, and if we have had it, we're going to get it again. And that's unlikely to be a durable change. If it is a real change, I don't even know if it's a real change because they didn't do any randomization. I know they know randomization is important because they did do that the first time, and they do keep doing that for other things. So they are aware of randomization, but for this class of products, they certainly don't want to do it because randomization doesn't bend and flex like a tin spoon. Then they have the audacity to claim the safety profile is the same. That's just total bullshit. And then they have the audacity to say that we actually do think the evidence supports this, which they didn't have that evidence when they made the recommendation, and now post hoc, they're desperately looking for something to hang their hat on. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. The more you know, actually, the more offensive it is, actually. The more you follow regulatory science, the more offensive the current moment is. The more we think about the broader narrative in regulatory science that there has been an ongoing battle for 25 years where we, proponents of evidence-based medicine, have tried to put pressure on companies to generate relevant data for citizens, and that has typically been a policy position of the left, to put more pressure on companies so they can't engage in profiteering and scamming the American people and selling snake oil. That's typically been a policy position of the left. And now you see the left diving in head over heels to enrich a for-profit company, fail to conduct randomized controlled trials, cite low-quality, unreliable studies that their own Project RCT duplicate has failed to validate, make bizarre claims about safety that are unproven, have the FDA commissioner lying to the American people that misinformation is leading to cause of death, which itself is misinformation because he has no data to support that claim. This is very bad. It's just hypocrisy. The entire left regulatory policy on this is hypocrisy. Meanwhile, there are commenters on FDA policy who are happy to call them out for Aduhelm, for Exondys, for all the cancer drugs, but they'll be quiet on boosters because they don't want to touch boosters. But boosters is philosophically the same thing. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. If you do not defend a principle, even when it is not in your political interest to do so, you do not have principles. You're an opportunist, and I have no respect for you. And that's what they're doing here. They're obliterating the reputation of the FDA. There are going to be, Dan Carpenter wrote a great book, I think it's Reputation and Power, sort of this like 700-page tome on FDA. There are going to be entire books written about what they have done to the US FDA during this period of time. The entire kids vaccine debacle, that VRBPAC meeting, which is the Vaccine Advisory Board meeting that they called and called off in February of last year when they, or actually maybe it was a year and a half ago, they called it and called it off when there was a non-statistically significant trend in a non-primary outcome in the very young age group because they were eager to approve the product. This is why Marty, I think, testified in front of Congress that they had already decided they wanted to approve the product. It really didn't matter what the results were. The use of non-inferiority, the use of immunobridging, I mean, these are all extremely permissive regulatory tactics that do not generate good evidence for the American public and do enrich the company. And they're going to be judged very poorly in history because I also think it's very clear that further analyses are going to show that this subgroup of men in this age group clearly have been offered doses that were at a net detriment to their health. And that will be very problematic for the FDA. And so if you really care about the reputation of the FDA, you got to call these guys out. I think Waleed is good about it. He's calling balls and strikes here. I don't fully understand what they're trying to do. They're spending the credibility like monopoly money. They're going to burn it to the ground. The aftermath of what they have done will be such deep division on all of these issues. You are unlikely to have a functioning public health for, I think, a quarter century. It's going to be really decimated. There's going to be state-by-state variations like you've never seen before. And if there is, in fact, some future threat, there's going to be so much state-by-state disagreement. It's going to be stunning. There will be no possibility of a coordinated effort. There needs to be, I think, a commission to investigate the errors in a bipartisan way, to announce the errors. People need to apologize, issue mea culpas on all these issues, schools and masking and vaccine policy. Otherwise, I think we're doomed. Okay, bad letter in the New England Journal of Medicine. Those are my thoughts on it. If you like this, you know what to do. I guess like, subscribe, comment, leave a message, send this video to somebody. Subscribe to Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts. If you prefer cancer drug policy, which I talk a lot about because it's my deep interest, developdrugs.substack.com. And if you want some general medical interest, Sensible Medicine is good for you. This, I might make this available on the plenary session audio feed. Why not? And then I will be back with more. All right. Until next time.